Yeah, so I think I had the coronavirus. Like, the more that I think about it, the more I sort of like think that I probably had it like a month ago. Because I just recall, because I had like this pretty bad case of tendonitis in my shoulder. Um, I'm not entirely sure why that happened, but hold on, let me turn this up just a little bit here, just in case it's not loud enough. But I mean, I think it is, but uh, yeah, but I had a pretty bad case of tendonitis in my shoulder like a month ago, and I was to the point where I couldn't even move my arm. Like I had the same thing happen to me when I worked at Giant. Like I had this really bad case of shoulder tendonitis to the point where it was like I couldn't even move my arm, and like I was laying in bed. Hold on, do I got the low pass on? I don't want that shit. Um, couldn't even lay in bed, uh, except for like one position, and even that wasn't comfortable. But while I was laying in bed with it, like because I couldn't move my arm, I noticed that I had this like very very mild sort of fever. Like if I had to guess it couldn't have been over 100. It was probably in the high 99s, like 99.8 or something. I mean, that's just a guess. I haven't taken my temperature in a while. But I also noticed that I had this very mild sort of like scratchy feeling in my throat. And when I got out of bed, because I was under the covers the whole time, I noticed that I was like, in addition to the fever, I had like chills. Like I was like shivering on the way to the fridge a few times. But I mean, these were all just very mild sort of symptoms. And they lasted about 3 days. And it's funny because I had before this I had like a cold like a month ago, like or a month before this I had like a cold, and I noticed with the cold is, and as the thing is like I think I have kind of like non-specific sort of autoimmune symptoms, because I get these weird sort of like rashes on my body and like just sort of like weird symptoms all that. I mean, I've talked about them to no end, but I noticed after I had the cold that my symptoms flared up for about a month. Like I had this like this weird sensation in my sinuses. I was dizzy all the time, and I think that's because I looked this up. Autoimmune symptoms, they can be triggered by sort of like what would you call fucking an infection? Like if you have a cold or something, or if you have the flu, that can trigger an autoimmune flare. And I noticed after the cold that I had these symptoms. Then they started to die down. But then after I had this sort of fever thing again, which, by the way, after the fever ended, I had like diarrhea for a couple of days. After the fever ended, I noticed that all of my symptoms came back, all of my autoimmunes, and like really viciously too. Like, my sinuses were all fucked up. I was dizzy. Like all of my old friends came back. And my hands sort of like, and my brother had this too, where his hands got like really dry and sort of red and cracked. He says it, I mean, and it could be, but I've had this exact same symptom many times before, where the backs of my hands would become red and dry to the point of like being cracked and bleeding. And I think what that is like, it's probably because I was either the hand sanitizer or just the fact that I was washing my hands a lot. But it's my body's overactive immune system like responding to that like way too sort of like exuberantly. I don't know. Like, it sort of identifies the soap as like a pathogen, and it's like, go get the fucker. Even though it shouldn't be doing that. Because I mean, I noticed that like that's what I think the autoimmune aspect of this is. So I mean, I've gotten that same sort of like dryness, redness, fucking flaky, like hurting thing. I've gotten that on the top of my lip before. Like it looks like I drank some fruit punch or something. And I'll be walking around with that for like 3 weeks. And it's the same sort of symptom. And like I said, I've gotten the backs of the hands being dry before without even like washing my hands or like using hand sanitizer. So what I think that what that is, I think I had the fucking coronavirus like a month ago, and like the symptoms that I've been dealing with have been sort of an autoimmune flare up in response to that, because I just haven't felt right since then. In the same way that I don't feel right whenever my symptoms sort of flare up. And on the coronavirus, like, I'm starting to think that the numbers with this, I think way more people have this than we realize. Like, like I saw this news article maybe it was like a week ago, that said like half of the people in the UK have probably had this so far. And I'm starting to think that might be true because the more it just seems like everybody has had this so far. Like, I'm seeing so many stories online of people saying that, like, and the specific symptoms that come along with it too, like the losing your taste and your smell. I'm seeing so many stories that are like, I had this like a month ago, or like I had this sometime in February, like right around the time that I had it. And it's just like, I'm thinking about like the celebrities and stuff that have like confirmed that, like Tom Hanks, like he on a fucking whim got a test when he felt like he had a cold. And what are the odds, if this weren't widespread, what are the odds of that actually being coronavirus? Like, if this weren't widespread in the West, because at that point I think it was like sort of like widespread in Europe, but what are the odds of him testing positive for that? Like, just on a fucking whim, you know? And also that basketball player that was like touching the microphones and stuff, like. And this was also before it was widespread in the United States. Like, what are the fucking odds? Okay, I'm back. His dad was in the basement for a second. But yeah, what are the odds that just, like, the basketball player that was just touching the microphones and stuff, like, that he actually had the corona, like, you know, they just on a whim got tested and tested positive. Like, it just seems to me that this is way more widespread than it's, because I mean, it's probably airborne. Like, I'm starting to think that it's just airborne and like way more like spread, like way more contagious than we understand. But there's just like so many like mild sort of asymptomatic cases that people wouldn't have ever thought, you know. And like, as far as like the emergency rooms getting overwhelmed, first of all, I think that's probably just the very tip of a vast iceberg of like a tiny subset of people that get sick really badly with this. But since it's so contagious, like, it's expressing its, like, you know, just, it's already, you know, if 50%, it takes 50% of the population to see that one little tip of the iceberg showing up in the emergency room. Like, you might, if it were a month ago, like, you might see one or two people pop up that you might just think is like, oh, it's just viral pneumonia. Like, you wouldn't have suspected COVID. But yeah, so that's why I think that's going to level out pretty soon too. Like, as everybody's like, oh, it's on an exponential, bro. But you're just seeing, I think you're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. Like, that's the visible part of the disease. It's just a very tiny fraction of people that get a very severe sort of sickness. And like, the other thing to like think about is the fact that, like, and this feels kind of wrong to say since the doctors are on the front lines with this, but doctors are fucking liars. Like, they are the biggest fucking liars on the planet, because I could just remember, like, I don't know that for sure, like, you know, but the thing is like, I remember a couple of times when I was having that Marfan freak out, like, first of all, I knew more than the doctors about it. So, like, that's red flag number one. And then there was another time where the doctor said to me, because she was asking me, like, did you take anything, like any vitamins or anything? And I was like, I was trying to remember the name of some, like, vitamin that my mom gave me to, like, calm down my anxiety. She was like, oh, well, you shouldn't take those. I was like, you know, why? And she said, because, oh, there could be a chemical in there that converts into caffeine that makes you anxious. and that's going to make you anxious. So, you shouldn't take FDA approved anything that isn't FDA approved. And like that would not fucking happen. There is nothing in any vitamin that is going to quote convert into caffeine. And so doctors have this thing where they have this authority that they sort of abuse in order to like scare people into like, medicine. And there may be some benefit to that, but the other thing about doctors is that they are good at following rules, but they have no fucking ability to think for themselves or use their intuition at all, because the school system sort of like selects for that sort of thing, like the type of people that would become a doctor are like, you got to go through years of schooling where the main thing is just like, get the work done, follow the rules, don't think for yourself. You couldn't possibly be right, so just act as if you're a node in a fucking computer. So they're like follow the data type of people, but they'll fucking follow the data even if it's incomplete. It's a very dogmatic thing with because you have the World Health Organization saying shit like, oh, there is a 3.4 death rate with this disease, like that Tedros guy. Like that's obviously bullshit, but since that's what the quote data says, even if it's incomplete, they'll go with that. Like they have no fucking ability to use their inhibition. So it's like I'm kind of like a little bit skeptical about the extent to which these hospitals are quote overrun, because I know that. And there's another thing I remember. Artie Lang was doing an interview on Howard Stern I forget where he was doing an interview. It wasn't Howard Stern, but he said that a doctor told him that he had a sac like in his lungs that had a bunch of like old heroin and like old pills and stuff that like formed a sac in his lungs where it was all stored or something. And like, the limited amount that I know about that sort of thing, like, no, I'm sorry, that just is not true. Like that is absolutely some lie that some doctor told him to scare him. And I'm just kind of wondering if what we're hearing about the emergency rooms isn't something similar to that, like doctors trying to scare people into like obeying their authority. I don't want to say that they're lying, but I have that in the back of my head. Like, what if this is an exaggeration? Maybe not a complete exaggeration, but just like, what if this is being exaggerated? But as far as like this being the tip of the iceberg with the infections and stuff, like if you look at Iran, like the numbers from Iran, you could like Iran was following any sort of like social distancing with this. Like I remember the one of the leaders over there said that quarantines don't work, so Iran has been minimally socially distant. Like it's probably just people wearing face masks in public or whatever, but I don't think they stopped society at all. But if you look at the numbers from Iran, like the new cases per day, it's not on any kind of like rise that you would expect. And so I'm just kind of wondering, like people are saying that like South Korea or whatever, like, oh, they had to go to draconian measures to keep the infection under control. But as far as I understand, South Korea never did that. Like they were contact tracing people and like isolating the specific people that had it, but they never like told anybody to like stay home or anything. And I'm starting to think like, what if it's not the social distancing that's doing anything? Because I don't think South Korea did shit. And like, you're going to tell me that South Korea fucking tracked every single fucking like asymptomatic or like mild case? There's no fucking way that they got everybody with the disease to like hunker down, So I'm wondering if it isn't just like you're only seeing the very tip of a vast iceberg in the confirmed cases and the deaths. And like the reason that South Korea sort of like leveled off, and the reason that China leveled off too probably is just because the virus fucking swept through the entire population already, you know. That's what I'm starting to think is going on here. I think the virus has absolutely swept through most of the world's population because it's probably airborne, and it's probably got like they call it the R naught or whatever. Like that's probably like 20, and but it's just so mild that like nobody really gets that sick from it. Because Dad told me that that after I had the sickness, he said like maybe a week after that, he had like this sort of dry, scratchy sensation in the back of his throat, like he thought he was getting sick, but then it just went away. Like how many people out there are like that is what I want to know. So it's like I'm starting to just think that this is a nothing burger. Like I kind of was on that train to begin with, but you know, after hearing the Italian situation, like you know, I think the thing that happened, like the doctors overflowing in Italy or whatever, I think that sort of scared the world. But I think I'm starting to think like, was that like an exaggeration, or yeah, maybe not a complete exaggeration, but I feel like that's the moment that sort of scared the world. But I'm sort of starting to think that might have been an overreaction. Because you can't fucking stop a virus. Look, if a virus is airborne, you're not going to fucking stop it. Like, it's going to get into the ventilation system, and it's going to infect everybody in, like, a building, you know? You know, this, quote, social distancing, like, you don't stand a fucking chance against a virus in that situation. I mean, if it were being spread by sort of like big respiratory droplets, like maybe you would have a point. But if you're talking about an airborne virus, you don't stand a fucking chance at stopping that. And I kind of think what's more likely is that it's already swept through the population. I've said that like 5 times already. Yeah, so those are my thoughts on the coronavirus. I think I had it already, and I think it's causing me like autoimmune symptoms. It's been causing my autoimmune sort of like things to like go, hey, like I'm having a flare up as I kind of think I have a mild case of lupus, which I know that sounds crazy or what, like it's probably, but I sort of think that might be what's going on with me, because I have most definitely gotten that butterfly rash before that they talk about, like when I go out in the sun, or just like other times I've noticed that I've had the malar rash, but I don't want to get into that. Yeah, so I guess that's my coronavirus journal. Like I might get back into making journals again, but yeah, I just wanted to say that, just wanted to be the first one to get my opinions out there. I'm trying to, yeah, those were pretty much my thoughts on it. Yeah. So what else? Oh yeah. I have some other topics. Like I've got a bunch of journal topics like accumulated, but I might save those for another time. So, all right. Goodbye.